Hey guys, nowadays a ton of people in the backcountry are carrying around these satellite devices, and all of these devices are capable of sending out SOS signals. But 90% of what you think is going to happen when you press that SOS button is probably wrong. I know it was for me. It's like pulling the fire alarm. You imagine some massive response, but you have no clue what it really is. No idea how to prepare for it. No idea how to get the most out of it. In this video, I will walk you through a situation where we used these SOS messages from a Garmin inReach. This incident resulted in a helicopter rescue. At the end of the video, reflecting on how the situation panned out, I include some takeaway action advice that I think will double or triple the value of this button right here if you happen to be unlucky enough to have to use it in the future. If you have no clue who I am, I don't blame you at all. My name's Cliff Gray. I spent the past decade operating a wilderness outfitting business in some of the most remote areas in the US. My insights and strategies in these videos are based on that data set and experience. All I hope is that you guys get some value from them. If you like this stuff, guys, subscribe to the channel and get on my newsletter at pursuitwithcliff.com. So let's jump into the actual SOS scenario. I had 3 of my employees out with a family of 5 in the Flat Tops Wilderness area. They were having a great midsummer trip. The weather was awesome. All the employees had basic first aid training, and one of them had an extensive first aid background from the Air Force. The guys had good first aid equipment, and they were ready for this situation. If you want to see what they were carrying, you can check out a video here where I go through the kits that we carried when we were in the backcountry. I was at our base camp working on equipment, just doing routine stuff. I didn't have cell coverage, but I was able to check my email via Wi-Fi, and that's how I would check on the guys. They would inReach me via email. Around 6:30 p.m., I was a little surprised that my crew wasn't back with the guests. You know, operating in the mountains, there's always delays, but when this would happen, I'd get a little nervous. At 7 p.m., I check my email and I see this message. I have an emergency and I need you to send help. So one of the key things here is that I could identify where my crew and clients were, right? Because the location was provided with the message. They were roughly 2.5 miles into the wilderness area, most of the way home really, but they were in a tight part of the drainage. It was a steep section, nothing crazy, but it was a steep section that I knew pretty well. The thing is, at this point, there was no additional information coming through. The first message, I have an emergency and I need you to send help, is a canned message. Honestly, it's quite frightening to get that message. I'm thinking, is somebody dead? Is there a drastic situation? What do I need to do? Okay, so I didn't have to wait long because at 7:10, I realized that the Garmin system, because my email is in the device notes, is copying all the messages between the device and the Garmin International Emergency Response Coordination Center. So I, as a third person, am watching my crew do a phenomenal job. The next text message comes in here. Okay, woman fell off horse, not life-threatening, bring litter. And then the next one, patient states can't walk out. So at this point, I've also made contact with my guys outside of this SOS conversation, inReach to inReach. In addition to that, I've started to hike/jog into the area where I know they are. So we have kind of a triangle of communication that these devices are allowing us to set up. All right, so here's a quick primer of what happens when you press the SOS button. You press the button and it's gonna have a countdown. It's 15 or 20 seconds on the screen, and it gives you a chance during that countdown to cancel the transmission. After the countdown, the SOS is sent, and it kind of has a permanent thing on it that says that it has been sent to the Garmin International Emergency Response Coordination Center, right? So after that's happened, that's going to be on your screen, and that center is going to attempt to communicate with you on this machine. So just so you guys know, Garmin is acting as an intermediary here. They're getting information from you, and they're working with their database to contact folks on your behalf that can actually help you. They also pull from the notes that you have with them on file, right? So all the notes you put in that, that questionnaire online, the emergency contacts, notes about where you're going, all of that, the Garmin people are gonna look at that and they're gonna use that to figure out a plan to help you. I'll talk about this more at the end of the video, but choosing your emergency contacts is really important. And how you choose them really isn't the most intuitive. If you're just used to, over the years, you fill out so many forms, so many of these emergency contact forms, In this context, you're gonna wanna fill them out a little differently. All right, guys, just so you know, you can cancel SOS on the device, and I actually did that once we had direct contact with search and rescue during this emergency. It took a while for the cancellation to be apparent on the device, but eventually it did happen, and it gave me a notice that the SOS had been canceled. Okay, so back to the story. I get about a mile in, and I run into one of my crew, and he's got a couple of clients on horseback. I steal one of the horses, and I ask my employee to head back to base camp and stay put until he has talked to the search and rescue. Then I ask him to come back in with sleeping bags and some overnight gear. One of my biggest concerns in the mountains, regardless of the dates and the season, is that it always gets cold due to the altitude. Even in mid-July, it's going to get close to freezing at night, and that's pretty tough if you aren't prepared. In this situation, I was quite pessimistic about getting the client out during that night. I knew the country they were in, and I knew the surrounding topography. I also knew from being in a helicopter just a little bit that there was no way a helicopter could land in there. And even some sort of, rescue involving dropping a litter or that sort of thing was probably going to be impossible just because the tightness of the canyon, and there was kind of a canopy in the aspens there. For that kind of rescue, the client was going to have to be moved a fair amount of distance. I'll talk about this helicopter dynamic more. It actually arose another time also when the SOS was used during a mountaineering accident I was involved in. I'll get a video out about that situation sometime in the future. Anyways, you need to understand that situations with helicopters take time. It's not unreasonable or anything, but maybe it's just movies and TV that give us this false perception that a helicopter can be anywhere, in any conditions, and just pluck us away to safety. The machines are amazing, as are their pilots, but they have safety protocols and limitations. You also have to understand that they are constantly going into the unknown, a new situation, a new spot, almost every time. So I arrived to the clients and crew with about an hour of daylight left. The gal that is hurt is a very sweet lady. She seems to be marginally comfortable, but also scared to move. Her husband is similar. He's frightened, but the guy is a total blessing. He's not hysterical or anything. He just wants to be out of there. I'll mention something here that is really important, particularly for someone like myself that has only seen it a couple times, and I am far from being accustomed to it. Seeing someone in extreme pain, like shrieking, this kind of thing, it's mind-boggling, and it stuns progress in these situations. I was blessed in this particular situation not to have to deal with these while trying to figure out a solution. It's hard when that's the case. If you run into that situation, you have to zone it out. So my crew is solid, they have the situation under control. The main thing I noticed is that they are worried about the SOS button. I sense a lot of internal debate amongst them regarding whether pushing the button was the right choice or not. As a team, they concluded that it made sense to do that, and I think they made the right choice. I once listened to a webinar from the Garmin folks. They did a good job of describing when it's appropriate to push the SOS button. They describe it simply as this: when you don't know the outcome of the situation. So in this case, the client didn't feel like she could walk or ride out due to being hurt and or frightened. So my crew was not able to confer an exact outcome without help. Hence, it made sense for them to hit the SOS button. This goes for a lot of situations, guys. If you're lost, if there's other different situations like that, if you don't know the outcome, it's okay to push the SOS button. At this point, I start to communicate with search and rescue and reiterate the observations of my crew. Not life-threatening, but the client is refusing to stand up and she's citing back and side pain. What she describes to me sounds like broken ribs, but she also has back concerns, and she is clearly in pain when she tries to move around at all. Search and rescue shoots me a proposed helicopter landing spot, roughly 1.5 to 2 miles above us in the drainage. I know the exact spot they are talking about. I also know that it's going to take a serious crew 5 or 6 hours at a minimum to get the client on a backboard up to that location. There are a lot of misperceptions on backboards, kind of like the helicopter thing. If you're going to spend a lot of time adventuring, it's probably best that you take a course so you can see what it's like maneuvering one on a rough trail and what it is like being on one also. Even if you have 4 to 6 guys on a normal trail, it's crazy slow because of the width of the trail, right? You've got the person on the backboard, and then you've got people carrying the backboard on both sides, and it's just grueling slow pace to do that because the people are actually not walking on the trail, right? They're off the terrain, right? And then you've got people with multiple headlamps on. It's hard to see everything. It's just a really slow process. The other thing is when you're strapped on that board, it's very uncomfortable because the whole purpose of that board is to limit movement along your spine. So you're strapped on tight and it's rough going. So I'm thinking at this point, it would be quicker actually just to put her on the backboard and hike her back down to the base camp. I wish I would have made this point clear to search and rescue. I didn't know this at the time, but the process of sending the helicopter had already started. As I'm internally brainstorming options and thoughts to relay to search and rescue, I get asked several times by the clients when a helicopter is coming. I have to break the news to them. I don't think a helicopter is landing in that vicinity that night. This clearly causes some distress. My crew and I try to calm it down by letting the clients know we are prepared to safely stay through the night. My other crew member is now back from base camp with sleeping bags and other overnight gear. I do ask the client and the client's husband if they want to attempt to walk out or ride out. Even with the challenges of staying the night ahead of them, they reiterate that she can't walk or ride. At this point, I sense fear from the client that her back is hurt and she doesn't want to cause further damage. This is a super legitimate concern, so I don't ask again. I'm not qualified to tell her that she is okay to stand up, ride, move, etc. My crew stays with the clients and I hike down to base camp again to meet up with 2 firefighters, one of which is a paramedic. When I get there, a good friend who lives near our base camp is there and willing to hike back in with us. At this point, I feel like there is an abundance of help, which is a great feeling in these situations, particularly given that in the back of my head I'm thinking about that backboard. As the 4 of us hike back in with the backboard, I give the paramedic an update. A helicopter comes in above us while we're hiking and the paramedic is able to establish radio contact with the helicopters. It becomes clear in that communication that the helicopter is unable to find a safe landing location near the hurt client. As we get to the client, the helicopter thumping starts to fade into the distance. This is again a downer for the hurt client and her husband. I feel a huge sense of relief at this point because the paramedic took over the interaction with the injured client. Like I said, this client was a great person, but even with the fair amount of first aid experience, I'm a wilderness first responder, I've done the recertification probably 10 times, I felt at a loss on giving her some guidance on her back pain. I just wasn't qualified to do so. The paramedic does a basic exam and clears her spine via palpating it right. He reassures her that he believes there's minimal risk to her attempting to stand, walk, and ride back to base camp. He acknowledges that it is going to be painful and she does have real injuries. He also reiterates to her that being on that backboard is going to be slow and also a very painful process for her. This guy has great finesse. The client feels a lot more confident at this point, less worried that she's going to cause further injury. So she agrees to attempt to ride down. At this point, it's about an hour or so into the dark. Luckily, I have a very broke mule with us. This whole situation is a lot for even the gentlest horse or mule. The paramedics, myself, and crew are able to help the client up on the mule. The client is clearly in a lot of pain with the movement, right, as we get her on, but she powers through. I start down the trail, leading the mule, and each bump on the trail is painful for the client. But she still does a pretty good job, right? It's just each bump I can hear, ugh, ugh. Now, as we near the base camp, I've got the client, a mule, but there's also 5 or 6 other horses with my crew, and we're all kind of strung out, right? In the dark. I realize at this point that the helicopter is gonna have to swing right above us to land in the new proposed location, like right above us. This chopper is gonna come like 50 yards above us. I also realize that this could be a major issue that the pilots aren't considering. These horses and mules could literally go berserk when that helicopter gets that close to them. And I don't want to create a bigger issue with other injuries. In the whole process, I kept my cool with the exception of this point. I become adamant via the radio that we wouldn't come down until the helicopter has already landed and was turned off. I'll talk about this dynamic some at the end a little bit more. So we get down to the landing zone, literally walk the mule to the helicopter, and the helicopter crew helps myself and the paramedic unload the client directly from the mule to the gurney. The helicopter flies her to the local hospital and we coordinate with the rest of the clients to get them set up on their way to meet up with her. It turns out the client had some real injuries that would be quite painful, broken ribs, fractures, etc. She was fine, but I can imagine how scary it was for her. Okay guys, so here's the fun part. This is the part where I get to be the know-it-all because it's my video. I'm gonna leave you guys with my thoughts on what I learned and some action advice so you can take advantage of this SOS feature if this type of situation or worse arises for you. Before I get into this takeaway advice, it's going to greatly increase your value of the SOS. I have a couple other videos for you guys to check out if you're interested in this stuff. For a more serious situation, it's important that you guys know how to use a tourniquet or an Israeli bandage. I have a video on that here. My last suggestion, guys, is this wasn't a situation where somebody was lost, but a lot of SOSs are, so check out my videos on backcountry navigation. Here's a link right here. Alright guys, so this stuff I think is going to increase the value of the SOS button to you a bunch. Number one, maximize the resources that Garmin provides. Do the minimal prep in the system, guys, and it is minimal, but it's important. It actually makes a huge difference. The inReach form that you fill out online when you register looks like every other form, right? It has emergency contacts and some other information. On most of these forms, we put our family members, our wives, etc. But realize that the context here is a little different. Garmin is going to use these contacts as a resource when attempting to solve the problem that's presented when you click the SOS button. They're not just contacts that need to be notified if you end up in a hospital or something. Ideally, they need to provide value in the process of the rescue. So let's postmortem my contacts in this situation. First, the landline at our base camp. I almost always had employees here, so this makes a lot of sense. Employees within my operation would have a ton of information on where people were, the trail system, etc. They also have the ability to coordinate with search and rescue at a meeting point. They also had a lot of resources at their disposal. Horses, first aid gear, radios, more inReaches. For this particular situation, that contact wasn't used a ton, but I stand by that choice. It was a pretty good one. My other emergency contact was my wife. This is a natural choice for a lot of people. So in this situation, my wife got a call from Garmin, but she just assumed it was spam. I honestly don't blame her with all the crap phone calls you get today, but even if they had started a conversation with her, how would it have helped really, right, in this situation? She was in town with my kids. She's got minimal knowledge of the day-to-day operations up in the mountains, so she's not really able to coordinate anything. So I recommend everyone go back and look at those contacts you have in your profile. Do they have good information to provide? Can they be a resource in improving an emergency situation? Some better options for me would have been neighboring outfitters or even employees that lived in the local region, right? They would have a better grasp of the area and they had resources at their disposal to help in one of these situations. Who knows your plans best and who could be an immediate resource to search and rescue if there's an emergency? Your distant uncle you stay with before a mountaineering expedition could be a whole lot more useful than your wife or mother who's 1,500 miles away. Just something to think about. And you might need to change these contacts periodically depending on where you are going and what you're doing. The online interface is easy, guys, so utilize it and keep that information up to date and useful. Another thing is use the notes section in the Garmin profile. I had detailed notes here, stuff like the fact that inReach was used for business, but I should have had coordinates to my base camp in the note. Mapping software is incorrect due to some county line issues up there, so it would have avoided a little confusion for the paramedics if that note would have came up and Garmin could have relayed that to search and rescue. Again, just try to put yourself in that situation and think about what would be useful. This stuff is really freebie information that immediately transacts to whoever's going to be able to help you, right? Garmin is going to do a good job of relaying that information, so take advantage of it. Okay, number 2 on the takeaway advice front. Understand that you have input into the plan with search and rescue. And this is for better or worse, guys. I always felt that once I clicked this SOS button, I would lose total control and everything would be up to search and rescue. This couldn't be further from the truth. Generally, you have the most information, so you really have an obligation to have some input. As I mentioned before, when I knew the better approach would be to take the client down via Backboard, assuming she couldn't be moved otherwise, rather than the proposed site above us, I should have made that clear. The helicopter's first trip up and past us was a waste of time because I didn't speak up. Number 3, guys, be conscientious of creating a bigger problem. It's very easy to lose your mind in these situations. I know that sounds kind of odd or funny, but it's true. People aren't frantic, but their decision-making process kind of goes primal. It's very basic and it's laser focused on the immediate stimuli around them. I have noticed this in myself, victims and rescuers, even the experts. I saw this in the story I described here. I also saw it in a mountaineering accident I was involved in, and I even saw it in the Boston Marathon that my wife and I happened to be at. People don't see the whole picture when shit goes awry, me included. I'm not saying I have some uncanny ability. However, I have reflected on it a lot. There is a lot of value in detaching yourself from the situation, even for a few moments. That's what I was doing when I was walking down the hill leading that mule that the injured gal was on. If she fell off that mule, she could get hurt horribly in addition to her current injuries. I almost had an outer body experience of being up on the ridge, like looking down on the string of horses, right? And I was able to see the whole picture just for a second. And it got me thinking about how that helicopter was going to come down, and it could have major consequences. I'm not saying I saved the day, but I wouldn't have been able to produce that cautious observation if I wasn't able to detach for just a second. So if you can try to detach from the situation and see the whole picture, I think in these situations, it can help you make better choices and potentially avoid creating even bigger issues. Alright guys, so I want to hear your thoughts, even brief stories in the comments, if you've ever hit that SOS button. Alright guys, I hope this video gave you guys some takeaway advice that's going to help you if you happen to be unlucky enough to use that SOS button in the future. Good luck out there, guys.